I'm going to be honest, I had a lot of hard work to do in preparation for today, and for the last few days and sleepless nights. So let the stress begin. The hard work involved something really important and fundamental to what we're talking about today, and that's self-regulation. I had to use my brain to enable me to stand up here and speak to you today. And you can probably tell, I'll warm up as I go along, I hope, but my voice is probably just a little bit wobbly right now, because I don't mind admitting to you, this is a pretty daunting and nerve-wracking experience. Melanie told me about 2 weeks ago that there were 70 people signed up, and I went, eh. And then she said, a few days ago, oh, there's 100 people signed up, and I'm like, oh. So numbers seem to be really important somehow. So when Melanie asked me to do the masterclass, she said, are you interested in this? And I said, yes, of course. Why wouldn't it be? I could speak for weeks on this subject. It's one of my favourites. And then I sat down to think about it and to prepare, and some old ghosts came back to haunt me. You're not a psychologist, you're not a psychiatrist, you're not even a neuroscientist. No one's going to want to hear from a social worker. Negative self-talk. And I nearly emailed Melanie back to say, actually, I've changed my mind. I've double-booked myself. I forgot I was on holiday. The dog ate my homework. Because, of course, I couldn't admit to her that I was scared. I didn't want to do that. I took some deep breaths. I reminded myself of what I've learned from years of experience of working with children who've experienced trauma and their families. And I thought, do you know what? I have a lot to share with you in terms of practice experience, and I think it is something that you would like to hear today. So here I am. I decided that something of value, I could share something of value with you today because there's been so much research that we're familiar with about infant brain development and the benefits of trauma-informed approach. But we, as grassroots workers and carers, are struggling in practice with these children and families. The more we're exposed to video images of children in our streets and schools beating up on one another, and the more informed about the number of children out of school or experiencing multi-placement moves in the care system, the more this feels like an epidemic of gigantic proportions. So, Kieran's already mentioned the self-regulatory system. What I'm getting at is that behaviour is underpinned by a biological process called the self-regulatory system. Here's the biology bit in layman's terms, because as I said, I'm not a neuroscientist. If you would like to know more about this, there are a number of leading neuroscientists and psychotherapists and psychologists who've written intelligently, as they would, about it, and you can access videos on YouTube and listen to them explain in a scientific way more about this. Dan Siegel, who explains flipping your lid using his fist, believe it or not, is in fact, well, I'm actually going to show you a little clip of him explaining that a little bit later on in the presentation, just to strengthen my credibility a little bit. Okay, so your body's set up to react to threat. Kieran's mentioned that. I feel like there's an Alsatian in the room right now. My heart's pounding. I'm probably breathing a bit too quickly, and I need to slow down. I need to get control of my self-regulatory system. But that system's really, really important because it's there to protect you. It's there to save your life. When you perceive threat, you might look something like this. And when you perceive threat, your brain's smoke detector, I call it smoke detector because it's easier, it's actually called the amygdala, which sits at the base of the hypothalamus in the limbic system of the brain. It sends off signals to your adrenal glands, not in your brain, they're somewhere near your kidneys, by the way, and a surge of hormones are released, mostly adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline increases your heart rate, elevates your blood pressure, and boosts your energy supplies. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of adrenaline and cortisol rushing through my system right now. The primary stress hormone is cortisol, and it increases glucose in the bloodstream. These two hormones are preparing for fight, flight, or freeze responses, hence looking a little bit like this. But once the perceived threat is gone, as Kieran said earlier, once that Alsatian is gone or you've got yourself out of the situation, hormone levels return to normal. But when stressors are always present and you constantly feel under attack, live in fear, that alarm system, your smoke detector, remains switched on. You've heard someone having a short fuse, that's the sensitive amygdala. Long-term activation of stress response system and overexposure to cortisol and adrenaline can disrupt almost all of your body's processes. This puts you at increased risk of numerous health and social problems. And so that brings me to ACEs, which we're here to talk about today. Adverse childhood experiences. So between 95 and 97, Vincent Folletti and colleagues surveyed childhood trauma experiences in over 17,000 patients. So what started out looking at medical problems in adults, such as diabetes and obesity, but mainly obesity, led to this. The study was published in 1998, that's a long time ago, as the relationship of adult health status to childhood abuse and household dysfunction in the American Journal of Preventative Medicine, and I bet you've all got a copy of that. And here are the findings. Adverse childhood experiences are common. 28% reported physical abuse, that's 4,760 of those 17,000 patients. 21 reported sexual abuse, 357 of them. ACEs often occur together, and a person's cumulative, I knew I should have avoided words like that, score has a strong relationship to numerous health, social, and behavioural problems. So, advances in neuroscientific research shows that epigenetic transmission, so that's changes in gene function on top of or in addition to the traditional genetic basis for inheritance, occurs due to stress during pregnancy or during interactions between the mum and the infant. Maternal stress, such as depression and exposure to domestic violence, have been shown to have epigenetic effects on infants. It changes the biology. These babies are born in a state of arousal and alertness to environmental and relational threats. And I just want to share something personal with you. Earlier, I think Magella said that her baby was 18 today. My first baby is 29 today. Woo! Happy birthday, Zach. So, when you experience lots of this, and you develop a secure attachment, giving you the confidence and security to go out and explore the world, knowing you're safe to do so. A child who's been exposed to ACEs has limited capacity to care and to love. Their bodies are filled with hurt. When children hurt, they pass the hurt on to others. Children can't manage feelings. Feelings are biological. This is what happens in schools, in families, in foster placements, adoptive placements. People see behaviour, a child is rude, hits, kicks, bites, spits, and we call that challenging behaviour. The child's fear is projected onto us, and we become fearful. He's my favourite. Children who've been traumatised by ACEs put up barriers. Those barriers often look like challenging behaviour, such as aggression and violence. I'm going to keep those big people who hurt me away. So I'll be vile. I'll become big and I'll become dangerous. And what happens to the adult caring or working with that child? Well, the adult in turn uses relationship to punish the child. We withdraw, we send the child to isolation, we reject them by sending them away, we send them to someone with more authority. This all consolidates the child's internal working model. I'm bad, unworthy, scary. Adults can't be relied upon to keep me safe. Children set up situations to enforce predictability. If a punitive, angry adult is their reality, then that's what the outcome will be. A confrontation with a punitive and angry adult, the more the adult is exposed to something biological occurs. The body's natural reward system is deactivated. Caring for these children is joyless, fearful, and anxiety-provoking. We feel helpless and de-skilled. The connection is broken. There's a falling out of love experience. Dan Hughes and John Balin write very beautifully about the process that they've coined block care. Adults are at risk of acute block care when they suffer a sudden life change, like bereavement or divorce. Adults are at risk of chronic block care when they have unresolved issues of loss, grief, abuse in their own histories, or a number of ACEs, in other words. Stage-specific occurs when stages of a child's development changes the dynamic of the relationship and trigger memories or emotional responses or issues from their own histories. For example, the terrible twos, not being able to get this child in a temper tantrum under control, may trigger a memory of when that person didn't have much control as a child. Or the teenage years can throw up a number of challenges for parents, throwing them into turmoil, bringing up memories from their own childhoods as well. Child-specific may be based on the child's appearance or temperament, closely associated with an acute stressor from the past. Hughes and Balin recognise that parenting a child who resists connection, nurturing and love will inevitably lead to withdrawal from experience at times. Our biology changes our behaviour. The amygdala is switched on, so it becomes difficult to be rational, to be emotionally attuned, to think things through, to problem solve. We feel stressed. In fact, I would go as far as to say we become irrational at times. A parent told me recently that her child was challenging in school. It wasn't the first time. The teacher was so annoyed that she told the child, amongst other things, that as a consequence, he wouldn't be getting any dinner when he got home. The teacher told the mum that it was really important to follow through on consequences, otherwise her authority would be undermined. So Mum did. She confessed that she didn't think she should, and it felt wrong, but she did it anyway. Because after all, she was the bad parent with the bad kid, and the teacher knew best. Now I can imagine the scenario. In fact, I don't have to imagine, because I've been there in the moment many, many times. The teacher had become so dysregulated that she wasn't thinking things through. She felt helpless and powerless to stop the child from behaving in that way. Her colleagues were looking on. She was desperate and angry. I've seen that firsthand, what challenging behaviour looks like, what a distressed child looks like. It's scary, right? So here are a couple of scenarios. First of all, a foster parent phones the social work team. Her foster child has thrown a chair across the room, screamed verbal abuse at her in front of a much younger child, including sexualised language. This has been going on for about an hour or so. And now the other child was late for school. There was no trigger. They were in crisis. The child is 8 years old, and this is its 8th placement. But that includes respite placements, so it's really only 4, isn't it? Sometimes it makes us feel better to think so. He lived with his family for about a year. The social work team reacted to the crisis. This is one of their most experienced carers. This is bad. She shouldn't have to deal with this. She recently lost her mother to cancer. She's got enough on her plate. Frantic phone calls were made and another respite placement was secured, but for only 2 weeks, because that family had booked a holiday. So this terrified little boy was taken away and disrupted and distressed and terrified just a little bit more. I'm not condoning the behaviour and I'm not criticising the team or the foster care, but what I'm asking is, are we, without meaning to, hurting these children more? For about, or at least 12 years now, I've been advocating for us to be trauma-informed. I've been talking about services and institutions responding with compassion and care rather than rejection and punishment. It's been tricky. The concept is understandable and initially well received, but the practice is harder to achieve. I hear comments like, he's getting his own way, she's manipulative, she's attention-seeking. That's all. She doesn't learn from her mistakes. He isn't even sorry. It really takes a brain shift for this to be put into practice. A totally new way of thinking about behaviour and how to deal with it. Once we start asking what has happened to you, rather than, Kieran's talked eloquently about this earlier, and instead of what are you doing, ask what's happened to you. What we tell ourselves about the child shapes what we offer them. So here's another scenario in a primary setting this time, primary school setting. The head teacher phones the home because the child is out of control. The child is looked after and lives in residential care. He's in P4. He's been running in and out of class. He's been laughing hysterically, frantically, shouting abuse and threatening to break windows. He's kicked a teacher. That's the last straw. The child was calm, taken home and suspended from school. The teacher who was kicked phoned his union. He was very angry and his ego was a little bit more than dented. The media somehow got hold of the story and broadcast it on UTV Live that evening. The headline was, "Child Assaulted Teacher Today." And the question was, should teachers have to tolerate this level of aggression in schools? The child was out of school for a long time. Some teachers didn't want him back and were very vocal about this. Others were touched by a story of abuse and neglect, about foraging for food with his little brother when he was hungry, about being discovered early one morning in a hole in the ground by a dog walker, luckily enough, and being rescued by the fire service. He was cold, he was in pyjamas, he was hungry. He was lucky to have survived. About his toenails being ripped out because he had lost a shoe. About being made to watch pornographic films and forced to drink alcohol and smoke cigarettes while the adults around him laughed and jeered and abused him and humiliated him just a little bit more. So when the classroom's noisy and busy and when the child doesn't understand what they're supposed to do and they're trying to figure it all out, what's going on, when you raise your voice just a little and tell the child to sit down and pay attention, what does that mean anyway? I hear, "I'm in danger." It's the child's voice. "I'm in danger, I'm under attack. My smoke detector is screaming, I need to protect myself, fight, flight, freeze," or maybe a combination of those. Whatever it takes to protect myself, that's what I need to do. So there were endless meetings about this little boy. Everyone tried to convince the school and the Board of Governors that the environment was too stressful for him and it felt unsafe. And while he was stressed, he was unable to learn. So I promised I would tell you if I've suitably distressed and upset you, apologise. But then perhaps we need to be a bit distressed and a bit depressed enough to ask ourselves what has happened to you and how can I help you? And how can I self-regulate myself to help you self-regulate yours? The good news is that something has happened in the past year or so, or possibly a number of things have happened. It's like an ACEs trauma-informed resilience building revolution, and it's very exciting. So I promised you I would let Dan explain to you this flipping your lid with his fist.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child, and that's important to explain it to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
Okay, so what do we do? Well, we start to build their self-esteem little by little. We change their internal world from I am bad, I am undeserving, to I'm valued and I'm lovable. What do children need? They need adults who are scientists. You need to ask yourself what's going on in my body. How can I self-regulate? How can I then, in turn, soothe this child's amygdala? I just had a thought listening to Dan there when he talks about flipping the lid. In Northern Ireland, we often say, "You're doing my nut-in." And the amygdala is an almond-shaped, little almond-shaped nugget at the base of your brain. And I'm just wondering, is there any sort of connection there? I'm not sure. It's maybe just generally your nut is your head. I'm not sure. Adults who are detectives. So ask yourself, what does this child need? What is this child feeling? What can I do to help? And they need adults who are supermodels. Respond with kindness and compassion. Connect with them and then correct. Adults and children need safe, stable and nurturing relationships in order to heal. And the reason I added adults into that last slide was because a lot of you will be working directly with parents and maybe indirectly with the children. And remember that those adults often have experienced multiple ACEs. They're also struggling with this biological process. And they need safe, stable, nurturing relationships in order to heal as well. Thank you.